Hello. Today is Monday, November 16th. And yesterday I mentioned that I've been watching law shows, and I don't mean Judge Judy or something like this. Um, but I mean the Great Courses Plus. They have like law school for every person type thing. And then also I've been watching The People versus OJ Simpson. And then today, I just bought OJ Made in America, the ESPN documentary. Um, because in the Great Courses law school, like law school for everybody, they talk about a lot of criminal cases as like examples of how the justice system works. And they bring up really high profile cases that bring up really interesting nuances. Like the first one they talked about George Zimmerman and the Trayvon Martin case in Florida, and just how he got acquitted, and what on the surface seems like a gross injustice. They kind of dig into why justice was served according to the system, and it's really fascinating to like understand more about the system and how it works and why it is the way it is. And basically, what they set up what this course explains at the beginning is that we have an adversarial justice system. And I knew this, or like I experienced this, and I thought it was ridiculous. And now I'm coming around to seeing just that I can see why it's somewhat clever, but I still don't love it. But adversarial meaning that instead of like a panel of judges like the Supreme Court, um, instead of just like having a panel of like elders rule on a crime, we have a system where it's a jury of your peers and a defendant and the prosecutor, and then the judge is like a referee. And it's kind of set up like a game, like a sport, where it's like you have two sides and they fight it out. And then the judge is like the referee, and then the fans are kind of like, well, the media, but also the jury gets to decide like which was the better team. Um, and so that leads to a lot of strategy. And in this course, they're talking about all these fun, interesting strategies for winning a criminal case, um, which is actually very enticing. Like, I can feel myself getting really excited about it, like wanting to be good at this sport, or like wanting to play this game well and strategize well, like getting into the nitty gritty of this game called the legal system. And recognizing, though, through watching the OJ documentaries and the dramatizations, um, that it's not working, pretty clearly. And why isn't it working? And what I'm sitting with now is that it's like a very cerebral kind of analytical idea that we have for our justice system that is mechanistic. And it feels like I think the Enlightenment was this idea which basically created science. And they're like, oh, this is cool. Like the scientific method, like reproducing and like cold objectivity can produce truth. And then in the justice system, like similarly, if we have like an impartial jury and a fair judge, and then like representations of both sides, this is like a system of balances, like the scales, and it's very like scientific, but like science, it has limitations. It works in some ways well, but then obviously it doesn't in others. And what I mean by that, just to be clear, is like science, it does great at what it does, but then it cannot account for things that can't be measured. And there are things that can't be measured, and science can't handle those really. Similarly with the justice system, in our justice system, it seems like the definition of justice is anything that goes through this system, and it's not reflective or self questioning at all. It's like, well, if we put it through the justice system, then that is justice. There's no accounting for this other thing, which is like higher justice or true justice. It's like if we put it through the system, that's what we're calling justice, and that's the end all be all. And clearly that's not true, but the system can't account for that. So, what was really mind blowing to me was when the verdict for the OJ trial came out. I remember seeing this when I was in fifth grade. Our teachers rolled in the TV and they're like, "Hey, everybody! Like this is historic. We should all watch this." Um, and we watched the verdict, and I remember being surprised. And there was a black kid in my class who I was friends with, and it was very similar to the way that it's portrayed in the sense that it's apparently very clearly divided, that white people thought that he was guilty and black people thought he was innocent. And I remember in my class, like the black kids were the only ones that were celebrating, as far as I remember. At least this one friend. And I was like, huh, like I think I'm supposed to be upset or like disappointed, or I think my parents would be disappointed. And then check this out. I want to show you this.
If there's any disruption, the bailiffs will remove the persons responsible.
So, little context, this series weaves in actual historical documentary footage. Um, and I'm not totally clear, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of this, like the Oprah show and stuff, a lot of this is actually documentary footage. And if you take note, and they build this up throughout the series, that it's pretty clearly divided, that the white people think he's guilty and the black people think he's innocent. And so if you watch this footage, sorry.
The jury in the above entitled action find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Section 187.
So that was 25 years ago. And the whole thesis of this case is essentially that the jury was doing broader justice in terms of retaliation against the LAPD, which had been very racist, probably still is. And it was very heightened because of the Rodney King riots and like other things that had been happening, other rioting in the early 90s. And this was like finally a chance to like kind of flip the other way. And so there's like the specific case of OJ, but then there's like the broader context of the LAPD and racial injustice. And the jury went with the broader kind of issue, it seems. Because that's the dichotomy too, is that like the evidence, which is like very cerebral and like logical, was very compelling. And there was like a very emotional aspect to it. And they went with that. So the legal system is very like cerebral and analytical, and it doesn't always create justice. For instance, like the strategy employed by the defense was really powerful, and it dragged this court trial for a year. The jury had to be sequestered for a year, meaning they lived at a hotel and like couldn't watch the news or read the newspaper for a year. Uh, and there was just like constant back and forth and stress on all sides. Also, very fascinating is that this is like an uber tragedy either way. If he did it, then it's sad because a brutal murderer is free and justice was not served. And if he didn't do it, he's infamous and everyone like kind of associates him as a murderer. And so it's a tragic story and very compelling. The thing I'm sitting with is like is this really the best we can do? And I know it's a large task to try to like come up with a better justice system, but like this system is very, very old and antiquated. And there is such a thing as restorative justice and conflict mediation, which is happening in the world in some places. And I know a little bit about that. And that's just basically like asking the victim, like, what do you need to feel whole, like restorative, to feel restored? Um, and that is more subjective. It's not like a cold hard system, although there is structure to it in terms of like being heard and being seen and like things being shared and reciprocated. But it's more subjective, like what unique outcome is needed for this situation for people to feel better about what transpired. And I'm really I mean, that's been my experience, is that that's like a deeper sense of healing. Not that you can do that with like whole groups of people because everyone has different needs, but I think there's something really powerful about that in terms of it, instead of a cold, objective, mechanistic system that just processes crime and injustice, getting more personal and subjective and asking like, what was that like for you? What was that like for you? And like, and you know, this is just the experience I've had at the Patrick School. Um, yeah, so that works with kids, and I think it can work with adults too. And I haven't had a ton of experience with it, uh, with actual adults and actual crimes, but um, yeah, there's something there. There's something here because our systems of injustice like perpetuate, and that's why we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and like that's why we have perpetuating injustice, because we are out of touch with like the heart of the injustice. And when injustice happens, we run it through this like cold, cerebral, mechanistic system of evidence and arguments, which you know is important, but it's not the only thing. We're missing the soul and the heart of injustice. And so that is just becoming more and more apparent to me as I learn more. So now, after spending about 10 hours watching this Netflix series, now I have another 10 hours to watch on this ESPN series, but it's super fascinating. And yeah, and I stretch while I watch. So I'm not just vegging out, I'm like stretching. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts about the justice system and the head and the heart. So thanks for listening, and hope you take care of your head and your heart. Take care. Bye.